northwest as well. But that rain will become more confined to the east coast just throughout tonight. And it will turn a little bit drier elsewhere, but there will be a lot of cloud around by tomorrow morning, so it will be another fairly mild start to the day. But some drizzly rain will start to affect parts of the east coast just as that weather front starts to approach. So the east coast of Scotland could see quite a lot of low cloud around. But the northwest of Scotland could see some brightness first thing, but that rain will arrive later on in the day. Across Northern Ireland, some showery rain, but it's not expected to be as heavy as it has been through today. But it's across parts of North Wales, the Midlands, northeastern England in particular, where the rain will be the heaviest first thing. And that will continue to persist throughout the day. So as the day goes on, I think any impacts from the rain will become more likely as more weather warnings come into force. As that rain pushes up into Scotland, we've got another weather warning in force for Scotland. We could see up to 100 millimetres, perhaps more, fall over the 24 hours between Wednesday and Thursday, particularly across parts of North Wales into northern areas of England. So that could bring some major travel disruption, and temperatures are going to be disappointing for the time of year with plenty of cloud around. Rain continues into Thursday, particularly across the north and west. It's this north area of Wales where there's the most potential for some disruptive heavy rain, but it will turn more showery as the day goes on. And across the south, it will start to turn a little bit brighter by the afternoon. A mix of showers as we head towards Friday, and by Saturday, a chance of some sunshine and temperatures climbing towards 20 degrees.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, my name is Johnny Ratner with your latest. Long residual delays remain heading southwest of Belfast down the M1. There was a collision from junction 2 to 3 just north of Dunmurry. It's being cleared, but long queues back onto the A12 to the M3 remain. Now, on the Isle of Anglesey, the A55 is shut eastbound just before the Britannia Bridge, junction 8 at Llanfair PG, where a lorry is broken down, causing queues the other way on the other side of the bridge back to the A487. On the M62 in West Yorkshire, lane shut westbound 22 to 21 for emergency repairs. There are queues down the M6 toll just before the M42. Emergency repair works have closed the outside lane. And on the M2 heading towards London through Kent from junction 3 to 2 near to Rochester, a lane shut following an accident. And in Cornwall, the A39 has been closed at Wadebridge after two vehicles collided. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
The next Great British Giveaway winner could be you, with a massive £20,000 in tax-free cash to be won. Imagine how you'd react getting that winning call from us.
Oh my God, are you joking?
Not a line, what is it? I've never won a penny in my life.
I don't know what to say.
Do you know what? I've never won anything like this in my life.
Oh my God. Oh God. Oh, it shocks me.
This is amazing.
For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News fly with the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to Austria, where he tells us exclusively that we've deported 10,000 people in the last year, and we're supposed to be impressed by that. Tonight, I will give you some historical comparisons to show you that is a very, very low figure indeed. The International Criminal Court issue an arrest warrant for the Prime Minister of Israel. That, and at the same time, as the United Nations Security Council stand up for a minute's silence for the butcher of Tehran. I ask the question, just how much trouble is Israel in, and has everybody forgotten about the horrors of October the 7th? And the government tell us they're going to set up unemployment boot camps to get people back to work. It must be an election year. Before all of that, let's get the news with Sophia Wensler.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. A 73-year-old British man has died after an aircraft was hit by severe turbulence on a flight from London Heathrow to Singapore. The plane was forced to make an emergency landing in Bangkok. Airport officials believe the man may have suffered a heart attack. More than 50 people were hurt, 7 of them critically after sustaining head injuries. Singapore Airlines confirmed there were 18 crew and 211 passengers on board. 47 were from the UK. The Prime Minister has addressed the issue of illegal migration during a visit to Austria. Rishi Sunak says EU countries are starting to recognise places like Rwanda are essential in tackling the problem, with 15 states calling on the European Commission to tighten migration policy. Speaking exclusively to GB News, the Prime Minister says the numbers prove progress is being made in stopping small boats and thousands of illegal migrants are being returned to other countries.
The numbers are down by around a third. They were down by around a third last calendar year as well. So we are making progress. And just this year, in fact, we have returned 10,000 people back to other countries. That's 2,000 people more than we did last year. So that shows the progress we're making. And including within that are 1,700 foreign national offenders. Again, 400 more than last year. So yes, we are making progress. Of course, there's more to do. I've been very clear that I won't stop until we have stopped the boats.
Meanwhile, the former Immigration Minister has criticised the Foreign Secretary for his apparent stance on controlling migration.
I preferred the former version of David Cameron when he was Prime Minister, and he set our manifesto at reducing legal migration to the tens of thousands, and along with Nick Clegg, he scrapped the graduate route. So I'm disappointed if he's now campaigning to stop us from controlling migration and reducing the number of students coming into the country in this way.
And you can see that full interview with the former Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, on Patrick Christie's tonight. In other news, the government documents have revealed that people living with HIV as a result of the infected blood scandal could receive more than £2 million in compensation. It comes as the interim compensation payments of £210,000 will be given to infected blood victims for the most urgent cases, while the final scheme becomes operational. Since the 1970s, 30,000 people were infected with HIV and hepatitis through contaminated blood products and transfusions. Around 3,000 have since died. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Nigel.
Good evening. So Rishi Sunak jets off to Austria, a nice little country, albeit population smaller than the size of London. And he goes to meet the Austrian Chancellor, to talk about the Rwanda plan, to tell us that actually we are leading the way. Yes, the rest of Europe is going to copy our great leadership because Rwanda, 2 years on, has been such a huge success. We've spent over 140 million quid on the scheme. So far, one person has gone to Rwanda. We had to bribe them with 3,000 quid in cash to make them go. But on the aeroplane were the Press Association and the Daily Mail and GB News. They were the only people invited. Can you guess why? Because they are probably the two most critical people of government policy on legal and illegal immigration. And I think he is terrified of the year's immigration figures that are going to come out this Thursday. Now, whether they're as high as the 700,000 last year, we don't know. But I tell you what, they won't be the tens of thousands promised in successive Conservative manifestos. But he also gave a piece of information to GB News as an exclusive. Here's the PM in Austria earlier on today.
The numbers are down by around a third. They were down by around a third last calendar year as well. So we are making progress. And just this year, in fact, we have returned 10,000 people back to other countries. That's 2,000 people more than we did last year. So that shows the progress we're making. And including within that are 1,700 foreign national offenders. Again, 400 more than last year. So yes, we are making progress. Of course, there's more to do. I've been very clear that I won't stop until we have stopped the boats.
I'm sick of this. I'm sick not just of the numbers. I'm sick not just of the change that it's putting on our country. I'm sick, actually, above all, of the sheer dishonesty of the way that Sunak tries to spin numbers. I really have just about had enough of this. The numbers are not down, Prime Minister. Those crossing the English Channel are up by 20% this year. Are you listening? And tomorrow, if another 150 come, that'll be 10,000 that will have crossed the English Channel already this year. And as for the deportation of 10,000 people who are here illegally, and many of whom, of course, are convicted criminals who've been sent back, let's have a look at the historic graph of British government deportations. You can see that in the time of the Labour government, we were deporting up to 40,000 people every year who were here illegally and whose asylum claim was rejected. That's what the Conservatives inherited. From 2013 up until the start of the pandemic, that number fell. The number of those being deported fell by 82% to 8,400. And here we are, a post-pandemic year, and we're just above what was considered to be an historic low, and we're supposed to believe that they're doing a good job. They are not. It is all spin. Please do not believe a single word of what this man says. And just to show you what a mess this party are, can you believe, even when he talks about student visas not being a backdoor to immigration into Britain, guess what? He's opposed almost immediately by the Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, the Home Secretary, and a host of other cabinet ministers. They are split down the middle. They don't stand for a single thing. So when Sunak tells you what is government policy, do you believe him? Farage at gbnews.com. I don't, and I really am, as I say, absolutely sick to death of it. We'll wait and see what the official legal immigration figures are this Thursday. Joining me down the line is Professor Azim Ibrahim, academic and author. And, you know, Azim, we've discussed this before. I know you think the Rwanda plan can work, but the idea that somehow we're giving leadership to the rest of Europe, is that really credible?
Well, Nigel, this is a very complicated situation. You know, no country, no democracy has been able to tackle this problem of illegal immigration in a satisfactory manner. But the fact of the matter is the UK is leading the way. We can take it from the Austrian Prime Minister, who described the Rwanda scheme as a pioneering initiative. We now have 15 European countries out of 29 that want to replicate the scheme one way or another. Many are looking at that, and these aren't the usual kind of suspect countries. You know, you have countries like Finland and Denmark, and even across the pond in the United States, you have Trump, the Trump administration also looking at a similar scheme. Now, I've always held the belief that this is the only scheme that's going to work. Everything else is a gimmick. The fact is, as I've indicated to you before, we are now entering into the age of migration, and we will get huge population increases across the world, particularly in the developing world. And if you do not provide those people with basic necessities, they will simply move, and the top destination is Europe and the United Kingdom.
Well, Europe got this wrong back in 2015, implementing their own asylum policy, and I stood up in the Parliament and told them again and again and again that if you allow people who put one foot on EU soil, having crossed the Med to stay, they will, and millions have come. So I'm not surprised the other European countries are desperate. But, Azim, I'm going to take issue with you. There is one functioning, mature democracy in modern times that did completely halt illegal immigration, and that, of course, is Australia. They started off by saying that nobody that ever came via this route would ever be granted permanent leave to remain. They had a go at processing offshore before that, and then they just towed the boats back to Indonesia. So, come on, it can be done.
Yeah, and the Rwanda scheme is a very simple replication of that, maybe not to the same extent in terms of not allowing anybody to set foot in the UK, but the fact is that it's already having a deterrent effect. We've seen that in the case of Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. You know, people are trying to get out of it. And the fact of the matter is it may be expensive, and you rightly point that out, is an extremely costly endeavour. But Nigel, we are paying about £7 million a day for hotel bills only. And that cost will be recouped. You know, it may cost, you have to look at the whole picture. You know, it may cost 100 million, it may cost 200 million. But that cost will be very quickly recouped. And you only have to execute this scheme, literally for a matter of weeks before nobody will be willing to pay people smugglers, 5,000 to 15,000 euros to come across.
The logic of that, Azim, I completely get. I fear that our judges and the European Court of Human Rights will stop it from happening. We'll see. But also, just very quickly, also, under the Rwanda package, we also have to take people from Rwanda, don't we, into our country, including people with severe mental illness.
Those will be a very, very small number. And I've always said, the fact is that our asylum policy, the 1951 Refugee Convention, is no longer fit for purpose. It should be aimed exclusively at those that are genuinely being persecuted, those that are fleeing genocide and war, and not economic migrants, which is what we're essentially seeing. So taking a few from here or there is not going to make much of a difference. The fact is this scheme has to work. Is the only possible way of stopping these illegal boats.
All right, well, we'll see what happens, and we'll learn over the course of the summer whether it's going to work or not. I still have my doubts. Azim, thank you very much indeed once again for joining us on GB News. I'm now joined by Dr. Omar Hamoud Gallego, Fellow in Political Science at London School of Economics, and formerly, of course, at the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. Omar, what did you make of this very odd trip to Austria today from the Prime Minister?
Well, I think the Prime Minister was trying to convince himself rather than I think that definitely to be said. No, look, the Prime Minister clearly is trying to sell something. It's an electoral period. They're gearing up for the elections in the UK. And of course, in the European Union, the same is going to happen in a few weeks' time. So we have the European elections taking place on June the 9th, including, countries including Austria are going to vote. And so everything that comes out of any European leader on migration until then, I would take it with a pinch of salt. I think it's all electioneering. And the fact is that if you look at the plans that they have, they say they will replicate Rwanda, but then they don't say with which country. And of course, that's because it's very difficult to convince a democratic country to take in individuals, because of course there will be some people from those countries will effectively reject that. Now, we know the Rwanda plan is inefficient. It will not deter individuals. I believe it's extremely expensive, over $500 million for just 300 people to be sent there in the first place. And of course, it's illegal. It goes against the European Convention of Human Rights. So what should the EU instead do? The EU should focus on implementing the good things of the new EU Asylum Pact. There is a new framework for the resettlement of refugees, so we'll see how that gets implemented. But there are also some things that I think are generally scary. For instance, the detention of children. And this is something that countries that care about human rights should never, ever do.
Well, Omar, that's all well and good. And by the way, I agree with you. I think the ECHR will make Rwanda completely impossible. I do believe that. It's one of the reasons I want to leave it, but that's a separate debate. But what are we to do? Because unless we have some form of deterrent, then vast numbers will come into European countries, continue to come into European countries, and fundamentally change the culture of some of our cities in a way that makes them unrecognisable. That politically and culturally just isn't acceptable.
I disagree with that. I think that migration indeed leads to change, but if it's well managed, it can be a good change. And exactly those countries that you mentioned, such as Australia and Canada and the US, have indeed benefited from that diversity, and so has the UK. look at the face of the Prime Minister, look at past Home Secretaries. In fact, you might argue that they have, they forget that their own families have come into the country and then basically attack everyone who is from a migratory background. And I think this is incorrect. What the UK should do...
We've never... No, come on, be fair. Be fair to this country. We've always been the most open. And I think through our relationship with the Empire and then the Commonwealth, I think we've been the most welcoming of all the countries in Europe. And we had the best degree of integration up until 25 years ago. But when you see councillors getting elected, screaming, Allahu Akbar, pointing, saying, we're coming to get you, if that's diversity, I don't want it.
No, look, these are, I would say, exceptions, because all of the migrants that are part of the democratic process, all of the people with a migratory background that are part of the democratic process, such as Rishi Sunak himself, are indeed a success of integration, if you want. So if you focus on the individuals who haven't integrated, well, that's playing unfair, to be honest. I think the overwhelming majority that have come to the country have indeed benefited.
Well, as you say, it all depends on numbers. If it's a handful that refuse to integrate and want to impose their culture upon us, we haven't got a problem. If it's a growing number and moves to millions, it would be different. Omar, as ever, a delight to have you on the programme. Thank you. Never let it be said that GB News do not allow all arguments, and we do, and we let you at home make your own minds up. In a moment, there's been apparently a very big crackdown on grooming gangs. It sounds like good news. In a moment, we'll find out more.
I'm Mark Dolan, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 p.m.
Yes, has common sense won the day at the NHS? Yes, so someone seems to have woken up and realised people are more interested in the NHS making sick people better than calling them by the correct pronoun. Health Secretary Victoria Atkins is making changes to the NHS constitution, which will see phrases like chest feeding and people with ovaries outlawed. Even Keir Starmer is getting on board.
To get the clarity, is it right or is it wrong for Rosie Duffield to say only women have a cervix?
Well, look, biologically, she, of course, is right about that.
So do you owe her an apology?
Well,
yes. Do you owe her an apology? This has been somewhat ongoing. But actually, Cressida, the NHS constitution, my understanding is it has to be changed or ratified by the Health Secretary every 10 years.
Yeah.
So it feels like this is coming more from the government and not actually coming from the NHS at all.
Oh, you mean because it's just time? It's just like it's time to have a look at the lease sort of thing. The 10 years are up.
But it's just that also a lot of NHS leaders are kind of saying, oh, no, we should not do this or there's going to be complications. It feels like it's not coming. It feels like the NHS is still institutionally captured and this is the government going, finally, no, enough is enough. Sex matters.
Right, yeah. So, OK, so I said there was nothing Rishi could do. I mean, this helps, doesn't it? It's time. It's time. That was fun watching that. I'd like that to have gone on a bit longer. I think the bit I was really going to enjoy was when he did or didn't give his apology. That's what I'd like to
Well, also, I think they should have just brought Rosie Duffield in. We've got Rosie here!
Oh, fantastic. Yes, like a sort of 90s Cilla Black.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Matthew, tonight, I'm Rosie Duff.
Yes.
I'm dry ice.
Surprise. What's the question? Has common sense prevailed?
Well,
yes, but you say it's got...
That's my fear of it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'll begin this segment continuing with the immigration question. It's the What the Farage moment. Tim Loughton, worthing Conservative Member of Parliament, and actually a very good MP who asks good, tough questions and really cares about these issues. He was, a couple of days ago, before the Home Affairs Committee. Just have a listen to this exchange.
On the care workers, you quoted 120,000. What was the comparable figure in 2019? I don't think you gave us that.
It didn't exist because care workers weren't eligible to use the skilled worker route.
Right, but so care workers couldn't bring any dependents.
They couldn't. There was no route for care workers from outside of the European Union to work in the UK.
So how did those come who did come? They had to have more than just a sponsored licence from an employer.
No, prior to the changes in 2021-22, when care work was added to the skilled worker route, if you were outside of the European Union, you could not come into the UK to work as a care worker because it wasn't on what used to be called the Tier 2 work route. Now, you may have come through other routes. You may have come, for example, family reunification and then got a job in care. You could have come as a dependent of a student and got a job in care, but you couldn't come as a worker.
You see, if you wonder why 1.2 million people from outside the UK settled in this country in the last year, for which you have full figures, next year's figures coming up on Thursday, there's another 120,000 for you that Tim Loughton didn't even know about because it's this government that liberalised the immigration system in a way that has never been seen in history. They did it for care workers. They did it for a whole number of categories. If you thought Tony Blair was about mass immigration, forget it. It's the British Conservative Party, especially in the time of Boris Johnson, that opened the doors to the whole of the world. And that is why so many Brexit voters are absolutely furious. They voted for control. They voted for a reduction in numbers, not a massive increase. And you just think about it, 2010 manifesto, 2015 manifesto, 2017 manifesto, and so on. They promise us net migration of tens of thousands a year, net migration approaching 750,000. And when you think the 1.2 million settled, remember that many of those that left to give us the net figure were British people of long standing, and therefore the sheer level of demographic change that is going on is just beyond comprehension. In fact, in 2022 and 2023, more people settled in this country than came from the Norman invasion up until 2010, the advent of this Conservative government. It's almost beyond belief, but it's not. It's true. Sticking with Conservatives, and by the way, I'm a fan of Tim Loughton. Sticking with Conservatives, another What the Farage moment is the City Minister, Bim Afolomi. And he has said that Britain should not give China the cold shoulder because its banks and financial institutions were simply too large to ignore. Yes, it would be a real mistake if we allowed ourselves not to view China as the best of friends. Oh, yes, of course, they'll cheat and they'll steal from us and they'll behave terribly and their human rights record is absolutely abominable and it is a terrible, awful, ghastly regime. But that's OK, according to BIM, because without them, the city might be a little bit poorer. Tells you all you need to know. Now, something very odd happened at the end of last week. I told you all that the Trick Awards, and the category that I'm in as news presenter, closed at 5 o'clock on Friday. It's now been extended. They've extended it until tomorrow. What on earth is going on? Do they not like the results that they've seen? Are they perhaps giving some other candidates a chance to catch up? Well, remember, go to trick.org, poll-trick.org, and if you haven't voted for me yet, please do so again, poll-trick.org.uk. We'll see what happens. I tell you what, they would not want me to win again now, would they? OK, let's get to the whole thorny issue of grooming gangs. A dedicated police task force was set up to work with police forces around the country, and we're told that across England and Wales, it's been really good news because in the last year, 550 suspects have been arrested. It sounds impressive, but then the scale of the problem is really rather large. I'm joined down the line by David Greenwood, child abuse solicitor. David, good evening. Welcome to the programme. Is this progress?
It is definitely progress, yes. Before all this Grooming Gangs Task Force, we had 43 different police authorities around the country doing their own thing. What has happened is that they have taken a lead from the National Crime Agency and what they learned in their investigations, particularly in Rotherham, because they pumped a lot of money into the National Crime investigation there, and have disseminated that information out to different forces who now have their own dedicated departments to deal with grooming gangs. Yeah, so it really is progress, yeah.
Yeah, it looks on paper like it is progress, but could it be that the problem, I mean, I know you were directly involved with the horrendous Rotherham case, one that actually shocked the world. You know, it made news in Australia, America, everywhere. Could it be that the numbers being arrested are going up because the scale of the problem is getting worse?
You are right. Yeah, the 550 appears to be an impressive figure, and it does take a lot of background work to even arrest one person. You've got to have a reasonable suspicion. You've got to do your homework and find out, all the information and evidence against that person. So 550 is a lot, but you are right. There are thousands of unarrested suspects still out there who have, in their miserable past, done this to young girls in the back of cars or wherever they do it.
And to get to the sort of thorniest part of this, David, when we saw the numbers from Rotherham, we were shocked by the number of young girls that were involved. We were equally shocked that a huge majority came from one community. They came from the Pakistani community. Was that unique to Rotherham, or is that the same pattern that we see across the rest of England and Wales?
Well, I don't think you see it across the rest of England and Wales. There are many white males being arrested for the same types of offences. But what you have in the northern mill towns is disaffected young men of different ethnic origins, whether it be Pakistani or whatever background they're from, segregated from society, educationally, socially, and in terms of wealth and jobs, etc. And it's not surprising that they will not turn out to be the best examples of our youth or young men. But there are white grooming gangs out there also. It really depends on the David, where you are in the country.
Yeah, I take that point. I was just making reference to the north in particular. And yeah, that particular problem with that community. David, well done for the great work you've done on this issue, and thanks for coming on and discussing this. Well, as I say, it looks like progress on the face of it, but maybe what we're seeing is just a symptom of a very, very big problem. And what happened in Rotherham, what has happened elsewhere, certainly in Rotherham, was a direct failure of integration, a direct failure, some would argue, even of multiculturalism. In a moment, tough times for Israel on the international scene as the International Criminal Court issue an arrest warrant, not just for the leader of Hamas, but for the elected Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. It seems that Israel are in a very, very difficult position and that everyone's forgotten the horrors, the atrocities of what happened on the 7th of October.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It's going to be another cooler day on Wednesday with some very heavy and persistent rain for some of us. We do have weather warnings in force for a large swathe of the UK throughout Wednesday. That's as this weather front approaches from the south and east, wrapped around an area of low pressure through this evening. So some very heavy rain to come through this evening across southeastern areas of England in particular. We could also see some thunderstorms for the first few hours of this evening across the west as well. But that rain will become more confined to the east coast just throughout tonight. And it will turn a little bit drier elsewhere, but there will be a lot of cloud around by tomorrow morning. So it will be another fairly mild start to the day. But some drizzly rain will start to affect parts of the east coast just as that weather front starts to approach. So the east coast of Scotland could see quite a lot of low cloud around. But the northwest of Scotland could see some brightness first thing, but that rain will arrive later on in the day. Across Northern Ireland, some showery rain, but it's not expected to be as heavy as it has been through today. But it's across parts of North Wales, the Midlands, northeastern England in particular, where the rain will be the heaviest first thing. And that will continue to persist throughout the day. So as the day goes on, I think any impacts from the rain will become more likely as more weather warnings come into force. As that rain pushes up into Scotland, we've got another weather warning in force for Scotland. We could see up to 100 millimetres, perhaps more, fall over the 24 hours between Wednesday and Thursday, particularly across parts of North Wales into northern areas of England. So that could bring some major travel disruption, and temperatures are going to be disappointing for the time of year with plenty of cloud around. Rain continues into Thursday, particularly across the north and west. It's this north area of Wales where there's the most potential for some disruptive heavy rain, but it will turn more showery as the day goes on. And across the south, it will start to turn a little bit brighter by the afternoon. A mix of showers as we head towards Friday, and by Saturday, a chance of some sunshine and temperatures climbing towards 20 degrees.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent? That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The level of disrespect, even abuse, that is now being shown to Israel is reaching astonishing proportions. I mean, can you believe that the United Nations Security Council met and they stood up? Let's have a look at these clips. So here we are. They're all standing up at the UN Security Council to have a minute's silence after the death of the Iranian president, Raisi. And they're all standing up. We're standing up. Oh, of course, we're standing up, rigid to attention. The Americans are standing up, rigid to attention. The French, of course, they're there as well. And remember, these are the same governments, same representative of governments that have been doing the deals with Iran over the course of the last few years. This wonderful idea that President Obama had, supported, of course, by Boris Johnson, supported, of course, by David Cameron, that somehow we could tame Iran. And we got rid of sanctions, we freed up the money, which they used to spread terrorism. That, I thought, was an extraordinary thing for a British ambassador to the UN to do, and it was a real kick in the teeth for Israel. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, responded, I think, very powerfully later on yesterday.
Just this morning, you held a moment of silence to commemorate the mass murdering president of Iran. He is responsible for butchering thousands around the globe. Thousands. This is who the Security Council dedicates a moment of silence to? A terrorist? A man who murdered, oppressed, and imprisoned so many? How can it be that your list of moral priorities is so distorted? This council, which has done nothing to advance the release of our hostages, commemorates the man responsible for their suffering. What's next? Will the council hold a moment of silence for bin Laden? Will there be a vigil for Hitler?
Well, there you are. Very powerful words. He did say, Mr. Erdogan, that the butcher of Tehran was responsible for thousands of deaths around the world. He was also responsible for many, many thousands of executions that took place within Iran itself. Pretty brutal stuff. Well, to add insult to injury, yesterday the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants, not just for the leader of Hamas, but for the leader of the only elected country in that region of the world. Yep, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Rishi Sunak did respond, I thought very sensibly to it, by saying there is no moral equivalence between a terrorist organisation and the Prime Minister of a country that is going after those terrorists to try and stop October the 7th from happening again. And yes, of course, there are civilian deaths in Gaza, and it is deeply regrettable and unfortunate, but I'm afraid that's what happens in all forms of war. But the reaction from David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, to the ICC arrest warrant needs listening to.
Labour's position is that the decision by the International Criminal Court Chief Prosecutor to apply for arrest warrants is an independent matter for the court and the prosecutor. And Labour believes that the UK and all parties to the Rome Statute have a legal obligation to comply with orders and warrants issued by the court. Democracies who believe in the rule of law must submit themselves to it.
Well, David Lammy saying that, I'm not surprised. After all, the Labour Party do not want to lose any more votes to George Galloway or the Green Party or whoever else it may be. And we saw some of that in the local elections. I'm joined in the studio by Natasha Hausdorff, barrister at 6 Pump Court Chambers and Director of UK Lawyers for Israel. What an extraordinary catalogue of events in the course of the last 48 hours.
Indeed, and I think the real tragedy here, and one of the key casualties, is the rule of law that we just heard being referred to. What we've seen is a campaign of lawfare across various international legal organisations, not just the International Criminal Court, but we've seen a great deal of this sort of activity at the International Court of Justice, the UN's highest court, and at other UN bodies and institutions. The UN Human Rights Council is a case in point, and of course you've referred to the Security Council.
Yep.
But in the context of this application we have seen by Prosecutor Khan for arrest warrants, if they are in fact issued, I anticipate that the international backlash will be severe, in particular from the United States, on the back of the comments we've seen coming from the administration thus far.
Yes, I mean, the Biden administration have been somewhat equivocal over the events in Gaza, but I think on this, I think you're right. I think on this, and Biden has already said some fairly, at least I think, sensible things. But do you not get the feeling internationally that Israel is now becoming pretty much a pariah state? Running out of friends quickly?
Well, that is the intention behind the parties, I think, fueling these lawfare initiatives. And I should be clear that I think lawfare needs to be called out as an abuse of international law in particular in these contexts. I think it threatens international legal order. And if David Lammy and others, especially here in the UK, as a state party to the Rome Statute, as a member of the International Criminal Court, really care about the impact these developments will have on law-abiding states, we need to be clear about calling lawfare out. In the context of these recent developments, while the intention is to create Israel as a pariah state, I think right-thinking individuals around the world look at the facts, look at the realities of the law, and hopefully see through these politicised initiatives.
Maybe the voting for the Eurovision Song Contest rather proved that point in this country, where the British public put Israel top. So, I mean, there is something there, clearly, in what you say. Coming back to this country for a moment, big march, of course, last Saturday in London, Intifada being chanted in the streets of London. But we're told this week it's all going to change. You know, the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, we're going to crack down on these marches in a way we haven't before. Big speech today by Michael Gove, talking about anti-Semitism. Is this a sign that the government are really beginning to wake up to this and to become robust, or should they have done this 6 months ago?
I think the concern here is we've seen a degree of flip-flopping over the last 6-7 months. It's significant that today we had a decision from, I believe, the court, the Netherlands, signifying that from the river to the sea is incitement to hate. Of course, we've had a former Home Secretary clear that this is a genocidal chant, and it remains at the centre of the marches that you've been describing.
So what do we do? What do the police do?
Well, they should be using the powers that they already have in order to better police. the law breaking that we are witnessing, which has been continuing on an almost weekly basis along the last 7 months. I mean, it's undeniable that that level of incitement has been contributing not just to the international discourse, but also to the way that the media has been covering this, and it's almost a vicious cycle. One's fueling the other.
And the way that Jewish people are being treated now at universities. I had an example of a friend whose daughter's having a really difficult time in year 1 at university. Yeah, I mean, it is very difficult. I spent 20 years in Brussels and Strasbourg in the European Parliament, travelling between the two, and I watched in Brussels as Jewish people literally left the city. The only Jewish people left were rich people living in gated communities while they had security. I used to walk in Strasbourg into the European Parliament through a Jewish area, predominantly Jewish area of Strasbourg, and see soldiers with guns escorting young kids into their primary schools for protection. Are we in danger, in London in particular, of seeing an exodus of Jewish people saying this is just not a place that we want to live anymore?
I think the question is, where would they go other than Israel? Because we're seeing this replicated all over the world. I've just today come back from Australia, and the time that I spent in Sydney and Melbourne in particular left me with the same unfortunate impressions, and communities all over the world are facing the same challenges, and there are very few governments, they are few and far between, that have been willing to address this robustly, willing to protect the vulnerable in this equation, and ensure that the balance between freedom of speech, which is sacrosanct, and against incitement to violence, racial hatred, and increasingly we're seeing that crossover from speech to violent acts as a result of, I think, the failure to be robust in those respects.
Yeah, and that's my feeling, that all these statements from big cabinet ministers this week should have happened 6 months ago. Natasha Housdorf, thank you very much indeed for joining me on the programme here on GB News. Well, would you, Adam and Eve it? Apparently the government are going to set up job boot camps. Gosh, that sounds tough, doesn't it? It couldn't possibly be it's a general election this year, could it?
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Sam Richardson is a singer-songwriter from St Agnes in Cornwall. Much of his music reflects a sense of frustration with life in a coastal town.
We've got a lot of empty shops in a lot of our town centres, which is sort of causing a lot of death on the high street. I know that's a problem everywhere.
Similar problems across the border in Devon. Ilfracombe is the most deprived area in North Devon. Twice the town has applied for levelling up funding. Twice it's been turned down, something North Devon MP Selene Saxby says is frustrating.
It's very complicated. It's not as straightforward as just throwing money at the problem. They're very deep issues.
For several years, the government has acknowledged that rural areas need extra help, but so far that help doesn't stretch to our coasts. The MP for St Austell and Newquay is pushing the government to change all this.
Truly local people are finding it really challenging because we often have sort of low-wage seasonal work, but very high house prices pushed up because of second homes and holiday lets, etc. And also, I think the disparity review that Theresa May carried out when she was Prime Minister highlighted that working-class white boys in coastal communities are some of the most disadvantaged people in the country.
Struggling to get on the housing ladder, struggling to find work, struggling to be heard.
It's interesting that a member of the party that's in government recognises that, which is great, because it is a really important thing. But that government, for the last 10 years, has also cut £500 million in youth services around the country.
No one thinks the problem of coastal deprivation can be solved overnight. The issue of disaffected young white males even harder.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a speech today to business leaders, the Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride, talked about the huge opportunity to fill vacancies with unemployed Brits. Stricter visa rules reducing businesses' dependence on overseas labour, and he forecast a decrease in legal migration. So basically, we've got to get all those people we've allowed not to work, who we pay not to work, whose numbers have exploded since the pandemic. We've got to get them back to work. Well, yes, Mel Stride, I agree with that 100%. I think we've been far too soft to allow so many to take that option. But then he goes on to talk about the fact we've got a chronic shortage of HGV drivers and many other skills. So he's talking about setting up boot camps and job training schemes. Now, this is, I think, a willful misuse of the word boot camps. Boot camps sort of brings about the short, sharp shock that we used to have for young offenders back in the 1970s, and this would be nothing like a boot camp. It's a very emotive word, but they are talking about having training centres, about encouraging people to upskill. I have to say, personally, I think this should be happening at school from the age of about 15. I think so many people that go to university would be far better off learning engineering or whatever other skill it was. But is this better late than never? Or are so many of those who've opted not to work, frankly, in a situation where they've given up and don't care? Well, who better to get on this than Nick Buckley, charity worker, independent candidate for Mayor of Manchester, and a friend of this programme. Nick, you know, I get what Mel Stride's saying. Of course I do. But when someone gets to the stage where they're happy for the doctor to sign them off, you know, I've got depression, doc. Oh, that's OK, matey. You haven't got to work for the rest of your life. The government will give you money. If you've got to that mental frame of mind where you're prepared to accept that as your future, is this sort of carrot, and that's what it is, this carrot of learning a skill that could get you a well-paid job, is it likely to have any impact? Or do we need perhaps more of a stick than a carrot to solve this problem?
Nigel, this is complicated, and this makes me angry. It really makes me angry. We've had a Tory government 14 years in power who have done nothing, and just before the election where they're going to get destroyed, they decide to start throwing out fantastic sounding policies they should have implemented 14 years ago. Now, first of all, we can't blame people for picking options that were legal options that the government have put in place in front of them. Now, I know people who sign on benefits. I did this 35 years ago myself because it was the best option at the time. What governments don't understand is there's certain things called pull factors and push factors. So a pull factor in this scenario would be better wages. And how do we get better wages? It's reducing immigration. And there's also things then called push factors. So we need to push people off benefits, but you can't push people off benefits into a life that's worse for them. The government have created, not just this government, but they've done a lot of damage. This has been going on for 50, 60 years, where we've been treating people in this country like sheep and saying to them, keep your mouth shut, sit on benefits, watch Coronation Street, and don't criticise us. And when you do, we'll give you a little bit more money. And we're killing people in this country. We're ripping their self-respect away from them. We're ripping their aspirations, all just so we can make government's life a little bit easier.
Yeah, no, Nick, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And as you say, this isn't just this government's fault. It's been going on for a long, long time. And when it comes to immigration, when it comes to upskilling, let's remind ourselves what a former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, once said.
A world leader in science, a world leader in financial and business services, a world leader in energy and the environment from nuclear to renewables, a world leader in the creative industries, and yes, a world leader in modern manufacturing too, drawing on the talents of all to create British jobs for British workers.
There we are. Nick Buckley, I'm going to love you and leave you on that. Thank you. We've heard it all before. Nothing's changed yet. I doubt it's going to soon. It's complex, as you say. I'm joined in the studio by Devon Galani, Director of Policy and Practice, a social policy analytics company, and the architect of the Universal Credit Scheme. Now, you know, we spoke to Nick there, who, you know, has done a lot of work in this area. I showed that clip of Gordon Brown.
Yeah,
I couldn't resist it, because really what Mel Stride is saying today is pretty much the same.
Very much the same thing.
Yeah.
British
but
jobs for
nothing
British
changes.
workers.
Actually, it gets worse. The number of people not in work, especially through disability, you know, it was 3 times the number that it was back in the 1980s. So, is Mel Stride right to say what he's saying? Well, of course he is, but is it really going to happen?
So I was at Mel's speech this morning, and I think I picked up 2 really critical points. I think the first one was the introduction was from the British Chambers of Commerce. So they introduced it from the perspective of the businesses that they work with. They've made 2 critical points. The first one is that British businesses struggled to engage with Job Centre Plus, and actually it was great that the speech was at a Job Centre Plus.
What a disconnect.
Yeah, disconnect sometimes between kind of the mechanisms to try and put people into jobs and what employers actually want and need. And this kind of recognition of the fact that actually this loss of the migrant route, people who come here to work, is going to be a huge challenge for British businesses. Right? And that's going to affect economic growth.
Net migration was 750,000 last year.
Yes, I know, and it's coming down, and that's going to put pressure on British. This is the British Chambers of Commerce this morning, right? So right now they're coming here, they're filling a large number of jobs. They're going to be filling fewer jobs in the future, right? I think 300,000 or so fewer. Now the question is, are British people able to, the ones that are currently unemployed, currently not already working, are they able to pick up that skills gap? And I think there were some really good things in Mel Stride's speech. I think the first one being that, you know, boot camps or whatever you call them, the idea of picking up skills quickly to get back into work.
That was an emotive word, wasn't it?
Yeah. But the principle of skilling people up quickly is great, right? The challenge, I think, is we're not talking about like for like. So we're not talking about migrants who are coming in here ready, really wanting to work, as being comparable necessarily to people perhaps who are unemployed in a different part of the country with a different kind of set of drivers, different age profile, to do a different set of jobs. And I think there's some real uncertainty, certainly from the questions that were being asked today at the launch event, about how is this, exactly the question you asked, how is this going to be any different? And I think a lot of what Mel Stride's done is steps in the right direction, you know, creating room for people who are disabled to take voluntary steps toward work, or to, you know, again, get skilled up very quickly in roles that
I'd love to see it happen. I'd love to see it happen. I make no bones about it.
But we're not talking about like for like. I think that's the critical point to make here.
One of the points about the disconnect between employers and job centres is employers tell me they'll have 10 interviews in the diary, no one turns up.
Okay.
Because they just say they've satisfied the job centre by saying, I secured an interview.
So I heard the opposite, actually. I heard that they were inundated with maybe poor quality applications. Similar point, I guess, but they were just had too many people.
Lots of applications, but they don't bother to turn up.
Or just are not quite the right fit for the... And that's exactly the same point I was making, right? So we're talking about people who are perhaps coming over here ready, willing, to a certain extent, with the skills and profile to be able to take up that job immediately, compared to perhaps people that are being heavily encouraged to apply for that role. And now I think doing everything you can to bridge that gap is absolutely right, and that's what Mel Stride's trying to do. But I do think it's not as straightforward as I think it's making out.
Final quick thought on this. One of the reasons for the lack of skills is we direct far too many kids to academic studies, to all sorts of social sciences. Shouldn't we be teaching training on jobs and skills from the age of 15 at school?
I got that. I don't know if you got that. I'm sure you got that, right? From being
I
a
did
different
a long
age.
time ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember my first job in work experience being in that West Bank.
But we're not doing enough of it.
I think we're doing... I think perhaps we certainly should be doing more. And I think taking that first job as early as possible will make a huge difference.
It's very important.
I'm an employer, right? So seeing someone that started on the CV, if they started work at 16, that makes a difference.
It looks good. We
or 18, or kind of whatever they were doing, right, as a student. It makes a difference.
Pleasure to have you.
Thanks.
Now, tonight, there's a special show that Jacob Rees-Mogg will introduce. It'll come up after the news, and it's a very, very powerful human story, incredibly powerful human story. That's it from me tonight. I'm back with you live here at GB News at 7 p.m. tomorrow. Before that, let's find out what the weather's like with Annie Shuttleworth.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It's going to be another cooler day on Wednesday with some very heavy and persistent rain for some of us. We do have weather warnings in force for a large swathe of the UK throughout Wednesday. That's as this weather front approaches from the south and east, wrapped around an area of low pressure through this evening. So some very heavy rain to come through this evening across the southeastern areas of England in particular. We could also see some thunderstorms for the first few hours of this evening across the west as well. But that rain will become more confined to the east coast just throughout tonight. And it will turn a little bit drier elsewhere, but there will be a lot of cloud around by tomorrow morning. So it will be another fairly mild start to the day. But some drizzly rain will start to affect parts of the east coast just as that weather front starts to approach. So the east coast of Scotland could see quite a lot of low cloud around. But the northwest of Scotland could see some brightness first thing, but that rain will arrive later on in the day. Across Northern Ireland, some showery rain, but it's not expected to be as heavy as it has been through today. But it's across parts of North Wales, the Midlands, northeastern England in particular, where the rain will be the heaviest first thing. And that will continue to persist throughout the day. So as the day goes on, I think any impacts from the rain will become more likely as more weather warnings come into force. As that rain pushes up into Scotland, we've got another weather warning in force for Scotland. We could see up to 100 millimetres, perhaps more, fall over the 24 hours between Wednesday and Thursday, particularly across parts of North Wales into northern areas of England. So that could bring some major travel disruption. And temperatures are going to be disappointing for the time of year with plenty of cloud around.